All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Srikanth Venkat. I run product management for security and governance at Hortonworks. And today with me is my co-presenter from Data Guys, one of my former employees. Ramesh and I used to work together. So, Ramesh, go ahead.
So, I'm Subra Ramesh. I run engineering and products at Data Guys. And I will give a more detailed description of Data Guys and what we do later in the presentation. To begin with, Sri will talk about GDPR and Atlas Ranger, and we will tie it all together as to how Data Guys and Atlas Ranger work together for GDPR compliance.
All right. Okay. Thanks. All right. So let's get started here. So agenda, we'll do a brief overview, not your legalese or by any means comprehensive, but at least to give you directionally where what the law is about. What are some of the aspects of it, and how some of our solutions from Hortonworks and Data Guys can help you with meeting some of the compliance requirements there. We'll also touch upon what is personal data as defined by GDPR, and also talk through some of the requirements around this and how we can use DG Secure, which is the Data Guys flagship product for detection, element level protection and monitoring, and then couple that with the Hadoop stack in terms of Hortonworks HTTP, specifically Ranger and Atlas around security, privacy, and then inventory and classifications. In the end, we'll also show a quick demo of how this interoperability works and how we can get that level of control with tools working in conjunction. Okay. All right, so the GDPR enacted last year harmonizes and extends a lot of the disparate directives that were there. The directives were opt-in and they were optional across the countries, and this regulation helped unify that, and it represents a fundamental change in how data is being processed across anyone who either sells services or is subject to selling to services or data within the EU or is impacted by that. So it's not necessarily restricted only to businesses that are in EU, but even folks who sell any type of service into EU. And it's widespread, and it expands like the data protection area quite a bit in terms of both the rights for individual subjects who are EU citizens, as well as the flip side of it in terms of the process and controllers, which are the entities, the enterprises, which are dealing with such data. And it places numerous, what we can at least today call burdens on different enterprises operating in this environment. And we'll talk through some of those regulations and how they impact the environment in terms of dealing with the subject's data, the processing, etc., as well as how some of our tooling will help with alleviating some of those concerns. Okay. So the big picture here, so the GDPR is intended as targeting the digital transformation economy today, and data, according to GDPR, is viewed as a business asset. It is the new currency. It is the linchpin of any kind of innovation that's happening. So that is very well recognized, acknowledged in the rigor that has been put into putting this regulation into practice. There's personal data that's leveraged throughout different connected ecosystems, and this is where enterprises will face most of the challenge in terms of the connectivity of the data and being able to trace and to be able to monitor, this data consistently and comprehensively across the enterprise. Overview of the framework, so I hope we can read it from the back there. But on the top you see the consistency enforcement mechanism, which is the data protection board, and then there's the EU courts and national courts, etc. And underneath that there's a supervising authority, and each of the enterprises will have a controller. And if, for example, if you have other cloud services, etc., where your data is being handled, you additionally have to deal with data processors. On the right-hand side, there is the data subject, which is the person who has the rights, and then there are duties on of the data controller towards those subjects. The GDPR facilitates two things. There's the right of disclosure, which you see there going from the controller to third parties, and also the rights that go one way from the subject into the controller. There's also some guarantees on third country and cross-border movement of data, etc. That is part of GDPR. We'll probably focus mostly on the personal data and how that impacts the flow of information within enterprises that are subject to this envelope of regulations. The data subjects themselves have several redress and recourse processes via complaint and resolution mechanisms back into that Central Data Protection Authority. So this is in a nutshell the different flows and the different sort of actors and their relationships in the context of GDPR. Okay, so let's look at, so what this is. This is essentially an infographic, parts of an infographic from the EU official website for GDPR. So what they talk about here is, on the one hand, the protection of your personal data, so the things around consent. So anytime any enterprise gathers any data from a subject, they have to disclose, they have to get the consent first, and they also have to disclose what purpose they're going to use that data for. So that speaks to the first part, which is the consent required. And then there are limits on how you can process that data in terms of automated processing, and there's like varying degrees of definition around that automated processing. The subjects also get rights around how to rectify any errors or any other redress mechanisms that are available. And most important of all, and the most thorniest of the parts of the regulation, is this notion of a right to be forgotten, which means I as a subject can go and ask an enterprise to say, show me all the data that you have about me, and I want to excise all of that, so I don't want you to know all that information or store that information about me beyond a certain point. So coupled with the consent and the right to rectify and remove data and the right to be forgotten, it becomes a complex sort of business landscape for most of the enterprises to be able to function under this regulation. And then that poses a lot of challenges, especially given the short timeline. This regulation kicks into play in 2018 May, so lots of challenges around that. GDPR also expands the notion of who a subject is and what is deemed as personal data. So it's like a whole gamut of things that you see there. For example, physical factors, physiological factors, even genetic factors, etc. And more importantly, other things like social identity, like even your affiliations, political affiliations, social affiliations, all of those can be deemed as part of personal data according to GDPR. So it's a very broad legislation, and there's no real clear taxonomy of all of the types of personal data that are subject to that. It's a little bit loose in terms of that. There's a core set, but then they kind of start expanding, saying even what you post on Facebook, everything else is gradually being pulled into this vortex of what can be subject to GDPR. There's also the notion of location data, other things that you would normally deem as being sensitive. So the whole goal here is that having that consistent sort of policy application and enforcement, and coupled with that is the consequences of non-conformance, which is very heavy fines. So the fines can be as heavy as up to 20 million or about 4% of your global revenue, which looks pretty scary for a lot of these multinational enterprises who are even operating in part of their business within EU. So a lot of pressure in terms of the regulation from a compliance perspective, and a lot of these very overarching objectives that enterprises are asking to comply with. Okay, and of course this kicks in a little more than a year here. So what are some of there are two things we wanted to cover here in terms of what are the rights and obligations under GDPR. So the obligations are from the enterprise, the controller, or the processor towards the subjects, and there are rights on the flip side for the subject. So some of the things that the controllers are obligated to do, which would be the enterprise if they're collecting the data for whatever business purpose, they need to obtain very, very clear opt-in type of consent. So they have to get explicit authorization from the subjects that this data, they are collecting this data and they're permitted to collect this data for this specific purpose. And on top of that, there's clear privacy notices that need to be accompany that as you collect this data. There's also the notion of breach notifications, and again, the breach here is very different from what you might technically construe in a security context. So it's more a breach of their privacy. So any of those other extended types of data that are now classified as personal data, such as your social factors, etc., all of those are also subject to this sort of breach notifications. And the regulation places like a 72-hour time bomb on this to say you have to investigate and notify all of the affected subjects during that window. There's also the notion of having an internal compliance mechanism via this data protection officer, depending on the size of the enterprise and the types of data you're processing, etc. And something that's kind of very, I'd say, broad and sort of very, I'd say, broad by way of the data infrastructure it touches, and also in terms of how you design your internal processes, this notion of privacy by design, because there's several factors that play into it. There's a need for a lawful basis to collect this data. There needs to be some assurance of the processing of the data is fair, and it's collected only for specific purposes, and it's adequate, and it's relevant, etc. So it's a whole slew of qualifications around how you collect this data, how do you process this data, and then the flip side of it around the accuracy, retention, and appropriate security controls, etc., that need to be placed within the enterprise as this data moves within the enterprise. And then above all of that is the notion of international cross-border type of transfers and the adequacy of those controls in terms of this context. Flip side of the coin for the subjects, access to data, your notion of remedying, so you can go to courts and get compensation for damage and mental anguish or whatever else, and then rectification, seek rectification or resolution of that particular issue with the enterprise. There's also objection, meaning you can say, I don't want to be marketed to, remove me from this list or excise this part of my profile from your list, etc. There's also the erasure, which is completely excise all of my data, all of my personal data that you hold about me. And then the other requirement here, which is kind of interesting, is that there's a notion of data portability. So upon request, enterprises need to furnish all the data that they hold about a subject so that they can take it to another provider if they so choose to. So that's the data portability requirement. And then there is also the notion of putting things on hold, which is restricting any further data processing based on requests from the subjects. All of this, again, needs to work in this automated decision making and profiling types of environments. So for example, in your direct marketing or website marketing, when you're profiling different users using cookies, etc., all of those are, now there's a higher scrutiny, higher bar in terms of what the accountability of the enterprise towards documenting those processes, the handling of the data, and also what information is captured and is legally obligated to be shown to the subjects upon request. So lots of interesting and different nuances to this in terms of how the law has been laid out. Once again, we're just trying to give you a flavor here. There's a lot of legalese here, and then we want to kind of give you the broad brushstrokes here, and then go into how some of the tools and how does this impact big data environments in terms of having the right level of privacy controls, security, and governance, etc. That'll help you with this. Okay, so big summary here is that the scope of GDPR is not only the controllers and process that are within the EU, but anybody who's has any kind of activity relating to goods or services or monitoring behavior from, let's say, a website or tracking any of those, even if it's in a multinational enterprise that's doing this on EU citizens, all of those are subject to GDPR. So it's a very broad legislation in this regard. So let's kind of shift gears a little bit. What we wanted to spend the rest of this talk on was to kind of give a little bit of an overview about some of the technology that we have within Hortonworks Data Platform, in particular the security and the governance aspects of it via Apache Ranger, Apache Atlas, and then we'll dive a little bit into Data Guys, the DG Secure product lines, and then kind of finish all these things up with a demo that shows how we can take some of these tooling and help you satisfy some of the requirements, help you at least satisfy some of the requirements under GDPR. Okay, so Apache Ranger in the HTTP stack is our centralized platform for authorization, and the coverage of the across the ecosystem is pretty broad. You can see all of those different services that can be authorized via Ranger, and it's a single pane of glass for your security administration, so comprehensive coverage across the entire ecosystem. This is probably the broadest we have in terms of all of the projects that are in the ecosystem. We might have heard of Apache Sentry, etc. So this is probably the most comprehensive we have today in the market. The way Ranger works is there's a notion of these lightweight plugins that are co-resident with the service that they authorize. So the authorization model has very, very little overhead. They run in the same process as the service itself. So we're able to get very high scale and very quick decision making on the authorization process itself. And we have first-class plugin for all of those services that you see here. For example, HDFS, HBase, Hive, and we provide very fine-grained authorizations on those, which means you can control at a very, very granular level what services and what level you want to control that, whether it's based on a user, a group, the environment in which this request comes in, such as an IP address, time of day, lots of different user context information in addition to the user information, along with the resource itself that you're trying to control, which could be like a Hive table, column, HDFS file or folder, etc. Very rich model in terms of the authorization. Ranger is also very designed to be very extensible, so we've got a lot of folks both amongst our partner community, also with other systems where they've taken the Ranger plugin model and extended that to other systems. For example, Pivotal is, they will be talking about this in our upcoming Hadoop Summit. They've built a plugin for the Hawk infrastructure. Microsoft has taken the Ranger architecture and they've built plugins for Azure and ADLS environments, WASP environments. Those will also be coming online. So there's lots of activity around Ranger as a centralized authorization model and the flexibility that it brings, and the open source community around it that has helped us further the project here. So Ranger comes with its own UI, so very simple, intuitive UI for policy editing and setup, and fine-grained by resource type. We already talked about it. So you could authorize, for example, if you take HBase, it could be column family, column, and in the case of Kafka, topics. In the case of Atlas, it could be the tag levels. So it's a very rich model, very fine-grained model in terms of the types of services that can be authorized and also what aspects of the service you can authorize. And we also support other things around access-based policies. In our prior version, HTTP 2.6 was announced yesterday. In our prior version 2.5, we introduced tag-based or classification-based security and dynamic data masking and row filtering. These are different new policy constructs that are available in Ranger, very rich constructs. We'll see some examples of those in the demo. And then you can see here, very easy to set up the policies. Your security administrators can go in a single pane of glass. They will have the right authorizations in terms of not only the policy administration per se, but also delegated administration. So if you have sort of like an overall admin, security admin who wants to delegate the administration of specific parts of the data lakes to different groups, that's also possible with this infrastructure. Audits and access, we have a non-reputable source of audits, scalable and written back to HDFS. The audit events themselves capture every single access request along with the outcomes, along with the user and the user context, such as which IP, what classification is attached to the object, etc. So very rich policy model here. Shifting gears here, so we'll talk a little bit about Atlas. Atlas is our project for metadata governance services and provides several services that you see here. So the first piece being data lineage and provenance information in the entire life cycle. So you could look at data that's coming into Hadoop from outside, could be scooped in, for example. So during those operations, we capture the metadata and surface that in this sort of this master data catalog, and then you can apply further classifications on those data assets after they've entered Hadoop. There's also very robust catalog search with which supports both free text search as well as an advanced search via DSL or domain specific language, and supports a whole slew of integrations around searches, real-time metadata, lineage, notifications, as well as a broad set of APIs that are open. And we strongly encourage community out here to go take a look at our new APIs, the V2 version of the APIs that are going out with our 2.6 HTTP version that was just announced yesterday. And the last piece, which is a significant piece here, is to the integration with Ranger. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So in our 2.5, a prior version of the platform, we've integrated Atlas and Ranger. So now, in addition to the resource-based policies, you also have the notion of tag or classification-based policies that enable you to do several things that you see there. Atlas lets you classify different data assets. Those classifications automatically move into Ranger, so you can use the classifications to author security policies. And there are different types of policies that you have there. For example, prohibition policies, which prevent toxic combinations, time and location-based policies. So you could say, for example, have a policy that says, I do not want to allow my offshore people to access the system outside of their business hours. So you can write very fine-grained, nuanced policies around how you control access to those resources. So that's sort of a brief overview of Atlas and Ranger. We'll shift gears a little bit and hand it over to Ramesh for DG Secure.
Hi, and thanks, Sri, for the introduction to GDPR as well as Atlas and Ranger features. For those of you who haven't heard of Data Guys is a company in Silicon Valley. We've been working on data security for the last 10 years. Started off with masking in databases, detection of sensitive data in databases. In 2011, we were the first to create detection capability for sensitive data in Hadoop. And as you can see, we have been recognized by Gartner over the years. Those are actual quotes on the breakthrough masking technology, the essential solution for Hadoop data production later. And over the last couple of years, we have expanded the scope of the product into the cloud technologies. As more people are going towards the cloud, a sort of a marriage between cloud and big data. Okay. Now, the DG Secure product consists of, as I mentioned, the detection capability. It's all about sensitive data. So first thing we do is detection of sensitive data and in a variety of data stores. And we have a pretty mature technology because we have been at it for a long time. The detection includes ability to do structured, unstructured, uses machine learning where appropriate, uses context for reducing the false positives. So that's the detection functionality. Now, typically the detection is governed by policies that are set at the CISO level. A CISO or a CDO or someone in their office sets the policies for the organization, saying that these are the things which I view as sensitive, and we have a lot of customizability and extensibility in the platform to allow you to specify various types. For example, you mentioned GDPR. GDPR has the core set of personal data, but then it also has these additional special categories which are somewhat vaguely defined. Now, those can be implemented in DG Secure because of the extensibility. Okay, so now having detected this sensitive data, several things can be done with it, one of them being protection. So protection can be either masking, which is a one-way operation, or it can be encryption, which can be decrypted. And the decryption is done using ACL writes. So that's one possibility. The other possibility is the detected sensitive data information can be fed into a monitoring system and raise alerts on access to sensitive data. A third and the fourth possibility here is detection can be fed into access control, and therefore sensitive data access can be controlled using an access control system such as Ranger, and that's what we're going to be focusing on in this presentation. Now, all of this information is available on an ongoing basis if you're doing detection and protection and monitoring. All this is collected in our repository, so this can be in the form of reports, aggregate reports used by, again, the CDO, CISO person. Most of the operations done, the detection or the protection operations are sort of the operational staff, whereas in the both ends you have the policies, on the other end you have the reports. Those are more useful for the CISO or CDO type people. Now, so the typical sequence of operation of DG Secure in an enterprise would be define the policy, and then run discovery and secure operations on a regular basis, and these can be operated through a command line, and then do the monitoring reporting as needed. This is a view of the dashboard, and as you can see here, the dashboard gives you an overall view of the sensitive data exposure in your enterprise. Because Data Guys covers a wide range of platforms ranging from RDBMS to cloud storage technologies, we can gather this information across the enterprise. And then we can break it down to sensitive data, on-prem, in the cloud, you can drill down further, etc. Now, as I said, we are focusing here on the feedback between the sensitive data and the access control system. in order to control access in a more intelligent way. If you don't have this feedback, you'd probably have the access control in terms of Hive columns or Hive tables plus columns. But now you can say you control the access based on some groups cannot see credit card number columns. Other groups can see SSNs but nothing else, or names, and maybe others just get blocked on the names or the addresses. So these types of information can be controlled and based on our detection results. And the way it's done is you set up DG Secure. This integration, by the way, is generally available, so it's in production. Can be, it was released in the early part of this year as a general availability release and can be put in production. So you can set up periodic runs of DG Secure detection, and that's running in the background. As and when DG Secure detects sensitive data, it updates Atlas. And as a preliminary step, you would set up policies for the sensitive types in Ranger. So whenever the updates are coming in from Atlas, because of the Atlas Ranger integration, automatically access is controlled based on the sensitive data types. Okay. So this is a pictorial representation of this. So detection, propagation of those tags to Atlas, and then Ranger policies based on the tags, and access control based on sensitivity. This is more of an architecture diagram of how we do it. So DG Secure server can be sit outside the cluster. For example, we have agents for a variety of database or data storage systems ranging from Hadoop, Hive, S3, blob storage, etc. So we can do detection across any of these, collect that information to DG Secure, and as I said, we can populate Atlas tags as and when we find something sensitive, and those get fed into Ranger, and Ranger's ACL and enforcement kicks in. Now, in my previous slide, I just want to briefly touch upon some of the functionalities of DG Secure here. We said that protection monitoring in addition to access control. Now, if you look at protection, we do element level protection at rest. So we encrypt or mask just the sensitive element, not the entire file, not the entire row. I mean, we do have a row encryption option, but typically it's at the field level and at rest. Now, one other thing we could do with Ranger is, because Ranger provides dynamic masking, I think it's an upcoming release.
No, it's already generally available.
So this could also be used, the same feedback loop which we have with Ranger could be used instead of access control, it could be dynamic masking. Okay, so this is complementary to what we offer in terms of at rest masking. So I'll move on to a demo. So this is the DG Secure UI. You can see here. So typically the user starts with a policy. For example, here they would come to a Hadoop policy, and we've already created a GDPR example policy here. So for example, if we take a look at that. So this includes addresses, variety of types of sensitive information. Again, if we come out of the box with about 80 plus sensitive types predefined, but the user can create any number of sensitive types using our expression manager, and they can be fairly complex types, and you can even have complex actions performed at the back end to validate these sensitive types. So it's not just a regex match. It's regex match is the first pass followed by complex actions at the back end for validation. Okay. Now, and as you can see here, you can choose for a lot of these masking types. For example, if you take credit card number here, there's a wide range of masking options that can be selected. So in fact, if in this case, for example, if I select a random, and again I have different types of, I can generate from a number. So I can replace a credit card number with a random number. I can replace it with a specific credit card number of a particular issuer, or I can retain the original credit card type. So we have a lot of different sub options in the masking capabilities here. And if you look at the types of, on the left hand side, you see the different types of storage systems that we support: RDBMS, Hadoop, Hive. Within Hadoop, you have Hive, Flume, FTP. For AWS, we support Redshift and S3. So we have an extremely large footprint in terms of platform coverage. Okay. So if you look at Hive Tasks, which is what we have looked at right now. So a protection task can be created like this. It essentially talks about, let me go back here and edit. Yeah. So this is a Hive database, and you can pick specific tables to protect, or you can pick entire database. You can select multiple tables, and you can select an option to mask this or detect sensitive data in it. The results show up like this. So it says which database and table, which column, hit count of the particular sensitive type, in this case the address zip or address unstructured, so variety of sensitive types being found here, and the ratio, hit ratio of each of these, so that a determination can be made whether this is really, for example, if you have 80 out of 100 hitting the sensitive type you're looking for, it's likely that this does contain that sensitive type. On the other hand, if you have only 10 or 5 records out of 100 that match, then it's most likely a false positive. So these kinds of measures can be, decisions can be made. We provide all the raw data here to make that kind of a decision. Okay. Now these are the results that end up as tags in Atlas. Okay. So I think this is the Atlas link. So as and when these results come in, they get populated here. For example, in this case, it will come under the PII category as PII for those particular tables. So this is a continuously updated stream, and I think you want to talk about this. Yeah.
So just want to do a quick. I don't know if all of you are familiar with Atlas. Atlas is our metadata governance solution. So if you look here at the very basic level, it is catalog search. So you're looking at a master data catalog that you have of all of the assets that are sitting within your Hadoop ecosystem. And this is the latest and greatest 2.6 HTTP 2.6 version of the UI. So you can go and select the type of asset you want to look at. So for example, in this case, let's look at Hive tables. So all the Hive tables that are sitting in this system are instantly accessible. So you can go look at each of these. Notice that we also track deleted assets. So there's a non-reputable source of activities that have happened. You can look at metadata about deleted assets also. In this case, I'm going into a table, so you can see how this table was loaded. Mm-hmm. There's lineage information, lineage being all the entries where it came from and leading up to this event. And we also track impact, which is all the downstream events that are emanating from this particular asset, all of the dependencies downstream of this particular asset in Atlas. Okay. So as Ramesh pointed out, all of these PII tags, for example, can be attached to different columns, and then we actually have the notion of attributes. So what type of PII it is can also be noted. So for example, if you take this credit card number and you go to the tag on that particular column, the credit card number column, we have set the type to be a credit card number CCN that you see here. So you can actually set it either as attributes or different tags themselves. All of these tags will now flow into Ranger, and you can write policies against them. Here's an example of a masking policy. So we have a masking policy that says if I have a tag called PII, and everybody, the public is in Hive, they cannot see this data at all, so it's nullified. And in the case of the Hive user, which is a super user, they should see the original value, the unmasked value. So it's just an example of a policy you can write. It's very straightforward to write. This is again, this is a preview, sort of a feature we are building right now in terms of tag-based masking. We have in 2.6 that went out yesterday, we have primarily resource-based masking, where you can go in and look at the individual resources, which are the Hive databases, tables, and columns, and write specific masking policies against those. Additionally, we also talked about row filtering, which can also be used to subset the data and provide the right views to the right folks. Atlas also gives you lineage of different types of entities. So that gives you the ability to kind of look at the process across your environments and get to an understanding of all of the data around that. So let's very quickly wrap up with Somebody's playing that.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, the DG Secure plus HTTP combination can be used for GDPR for the following purposes. One is detection of sensitive data. As we talked, it has the structured, unstructured, context information, machine learning, as well as customizability and extensibility. That's one. The second is protection of sensitive data at the element level. Now, this is masking or encryption options in Hadoop, as we talked, at rest protection offered by DG Secure, or dynamic masking as offered by Ranger. Okay. Monitoring is the ability to raise alerts. The same sensitive data, DG Secure comes packaged with a monitoring subsystem which can raise alerts based on the sensitive data access, whether the access failed or not. So attempted access, this can satisfy the breach notification requirement of GDPR. And then, of course, we talked about the Atlas Ranger integration for access control. So that's another area where we do satisfy. And finally, the reporting, the visualization with the dashboard of the entire organization's data security posture and any exposures within the organization, whether it's cloud or on-prem. That's also available. So essentially, with the combination of DG Secure and Hortonworks, a lot of the DG, I wouldn't say every single GDPR provision, but a significant portion of the GDPR requirements will be satisfied.
Okay, so we have one last item here. Just for if you need more information, please go to our respective websites here, and there are some other interesting talks here tomorrow. Today and tomorrow there's a deep dive into Atlas. Some of our Atlas PMC and committers are giving a talk today at 4:10, and tomorrow we are giving another talk on security and governance in the cloud from a Hortonworks perspective. And by all means, please do attend the Birds of a Feather. We'll probably have more discussions around GDPR as well as other security and governance topics of interest. So I want to leave you with that and take any questions. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for your presentation. You mentioned protection and ciphering or encryption.
Yep.
What about erasure? Can the guys or employee guarantee, because deleting data on the Hadoop, you need some guarantees, so it's not easy.
Yeah, so there's an approach that we're looking into is a way for you, once you've tagged all the data with, let's say, for example, expiration dates on those, to say, beyond this date, I want to excise this data. There has to be some level of data movement happening to maybe archive that or pull that into a different area. So we're working on other DLM type of data lifecycle management type of functionality that will come in future HTTP releases that'll help with that.
One possibility is to use masking or obfuscation or some form of redaction to, again, block access to that particular data.
GDPR is pretty clear on this.
Right.
Yeah, they want to excise the data.
Well,
Right?
excise the data,
Yeah.
yes. So that's, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you were talking about machine learning techniques. Which are you using in these schemes?
For the detection aspect, so we actually use machine learning for two parts of the product. One is detection of sensitive data. The other is the monitoring piece. The monitoring piece is more of a anomalous behavior of the user, either individually or with respect to a group's behavior. Now, coming to the detection of sensitive data, our primary use case at the moment is for reducing false positives in unstructured data. So that would mean, for example, you take the word April. Now, April could be a first name or it could be a month. Now, based on context around it, we figure out whether it's a month or a first name. Okay, similar to that, we have algorithms to disambiguate, say, social security numbers. These are typically 9-digit numbers, which in isolation could mean anything. But if there are enough clues around it, so we take the surrounding context. We have a training phase for the. We have actually right now in the product 2 machine learning algorithms, and for both there is a training phase which is out of band, and once the training phase is done, it's put in production where it uses the results from the training phase and gives out its predictions.
Okay. So one
Yeah.
further comment. So the training phase, you are going to your client and apply an own training phase for each client, or you have a general?
We have a general training set, but at least for some of our customers, they are willing to have a several week period where they would provide the data in-house. Most of our customers are financial or healthcare types who generally do not part with their data, so we would go on site and do that work.
And there's also the notion of custom types that they may want to add. So in that case, you have no choice but to do a new training
Right.
set.
Yeah, for custom types, yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah. Let's take one.
Individuals, right? You have a list of rights.
Yep.
The first one, access data.
Yep.
I guess you mean if the individual's right to get a copy of it.
Correct.
Copy of
Yes, the disclosure of the data that the enterprises saw. Yes. Yeah. Go ahead.
Do you, in which language are you able to work with your solution? Because paper in French is fun, and the machine learning that is implemented, is it only implemented in English?
So the language supported by the machine learning. Well, yes, it is in English at the moment. We do have support for certain aspects, certain functionality is available in other languages. For example, if you're doing structured protection, you can do it in any European language. For detection, we only have numerics can be detected. So we do detect the European numerics, but European language we are not yet there. That's work in progress.
I think the other thing also is the substitution when it comes to masking is also very language specific, right? So
Yeah,
that's the other piece that we need to.
So for that, the structured we do handle the European case. Yeah, but for unstructured, yes, it is absolutely in the roadmap. Yeah.
Any further questions? Go ahead.
I'm with a company that is partnering with Data Guys,
Okay.
and we are implementing most of the over 30 types of European social security number formats, and the logic after the regex selection, whether this is one or not. But in certain versions, exactly, in particular for file detection on Exchange servers, not in Hadoop. I think this functionality is not yet available that we put our jars.
Right.
So is that on the roadmap?
Yeah, very much so. So I'll give a brief. Which company is this?
BISCON in Munich.
I see. Okay. In the Hadoop product, we have extensibility. You can add your custom jar, and as part of extending your sensitive type. Now it's not yet there in the files product, and that is.
SQL product is there. So
Yes, SQL product it is there. So the only agent, it's all agents, different agents. The files agent doesn't have it, and yes, it is in the next release. We are unifying both of these together. Yeah.
I think we're out of time. We can talk offline. So thank you. Thank you very much.